When you think about the concept of banned books, totalitarian states that practice mass book burnings probably come to mind. But open societies are also no stranger to the censorship of contentious novels and historical accounts of controversial events. One needs to look no further than right here in the U.S. Now, of course, the First Amendment prohibits the outright banning of books by the federal government, but there are many less insidious ways that dangerous content is being kept off American bookshelves. Earlier this month, New York University professor Crispin Miller released a list of 5 historical books that have been actively suppressed and hidden from Americans. These books focus on issues from abortion to financial inequality and tell stories of an America that don't conform to the mainstream narrative we've all been taught. Join me now to discuss further. I'm joined by New York University Media Studies professor Crispin Miller himself. Thank you so much for coming on, Mark.
Oh, it's good to be back, Abby. Thank you.
So, Mark, outline some institutionalized ways that literature is routinely censored in this country.
Well, as you pointed out in your introduction, we don't ban books. The First Amendment prohibits it. But there's more than one way to skin a cat. And in fact, hundreds of books on crucial subjects, indispensable books, books full of truths that Americans really ought to know, have been undone in one way or another. Threats of litigation, for example, by powerful interests. Reviewers freezing out certain titles, or what happens most often is books are written off as conspiracy theory. What we're doing, I want to make clear, it isn't just listing 5 of these books, which we will talk about in a moment. Those are the first 5 books in a new series called Forbidden Bookshelf, whose purpose is to make important works that are now out of print available again. And the great majority of these books were indeed deliberately done in by powerful interests, by the CIA, by corporate powers, and so on. We're taking advantage of the digital revolution to do a dozen books a year. We're doing e-books, so that Americans can finally get hold of these crucial writings.
And Mark, why did you choose these 5 books for the first of this series? What common historical threads do they share?
Well, you know, it was an embarrassment of riches, but I guess you could say that we picked the first 5 because they offered a very interesting range of different concerns, and also because I'd say 4 out of the 5 really speak to the moment we're living in right now. First of all, there's the Phoenix program by Douglas Valentine. This came out in the early 90s. It's an absolutely crucial and harrowing study of an enormous CIA covert program that took place in South Vietnam during the war there. It was basically a terror program whose purpose was to combine the forces of the military and the police and intelligence and basically pacify the South Vietnamese population and keep them quiet, basically enforce the rule of the South Vietnamese regime, all in the name of fighting terror. Now, in his new introduction to this book, Doug Valentine points out that the Phoenix program could be regarded as a kind of template for our war on terror here in the United States, that increasingly we're losing our civil liberties bit by bit, so the government uses the danger of terrorism to justify all kinds of horrible infringements on our constitutional rights, so that it's now okay, for example, to assassinate American citizens with drones. It's now okay to subject American citizens to indefinite detention by the military. All of this was first put into practice by the CIA in Vietnam through the Phoenix program, which accounts for the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians in South Vietnam who were tortured and assassinated, This is a book that, as I say, speaks to today.
I wanted to jump in here really quick and read a quote from that author's new introduction because it's so damning. He claims the Phoenix has already landed in America, of course, saying, "Take heed, reader. Phoenix has come to define modern American warfare as well as its internal homeland security apparatus. Indeed, it's with the Phoenix program that we find the genesis of the paramilitarization of American police forces in their role as adjuncts to the military and political security forces engaged in population control and suppression of dissent." Mark, it's amazing that I didn't even know about the Phoenix program. I know a lot about covert CIA operations. I mean, it's incredible that this really apparently did provide this blueprint for the ongoing war on terror. Can you speak more to that?
Well, yeah, and the fact that you don't know about the program basically means that you don't know about the book. And you don't know about the book because the book was marginalized, ignored, and so on. Doug Valentine had a lot of trouble. I mean, initially, he got the go-ahead from William Colby, the head of the CIA, who was the most prominent defender of the program before Congress. And on that basis, Valentine talked to a lot of CIA officers who'd been involved in the program. So it's very, very solid in a scholarly way, very well documented. But it became clear to the agency after a couple of years that they did not want this guy to be doing this research. So they immediately clammed up. And he had to go to war with them legally. The ACLU helped him. But then what happened when the book came out is that Morley Safer of CBS wrote a very damning review for the New York Times. Whether he did this at the behest of the agency or not, we don't know. But in either case, it basically meant the end of Doug Valentine's career as a writer who would have a major publisher do his books. He was basically blacklisted in an informal way. So we're trying to rectify that great wrong and help Americans rediscover some crucial information about our recent past by bringing the book out again on the forbidden bookshelf.
Absolutely. We keep seeing these stories repeated time and time again, Mark. Another book, Lords of Creation, written by Frederick Lewis Allen, going for about $2,500 a pop for a new print copy on Amazon. Why is this book such a forbidden treasure? Mark, can you hear me?
I'm not hearing anything.
Well, we're talking about a book about the economic system and how it's basically predicted the capitalist expansion and predicted all of these things that are going on over the last 100 years. The robber barons, the Rothschilds, all these different families in the financial elite that have basically consolidated power and wealth over the years, predicting and predating everything that happened. This book was written back in 1935. Mark, why is this book such a forbidden treasure going for $2,500 a pop on Amazon?
Yeah, The Lords of Creation is written by Frederick Lewis Allen, who was a very popular writer in his day. And all of his other popular histories were in print. This one book was not in print, The Lords of Creation, which is a really highly readable account, basically, of the early history of the 1%. It starts with J.P. Morgan's creation of U.S. Steel and takes us through the history of how these buccaneering financiers have basically subjected America to repeated booms and busts and always enriched themselves in the process. It has the edition in Forbidden Bookshelf has a new introduction by Gretchen Morgenson of the New York Times, who really hits the nail on the head when she says that this history will help us understand where we are today and recognize that what we're going through now economically has deep roots going on for a long time.
Mark, another better-known operation than the Phoenix program is Operation Paperclip, of course, outlined in Christopher Simpson's book, Blowback. It's not necessarily the story that I wanted to talk about. It's his new introduction in this ebook. It's particularly fascinating to me because it outlines overt censorship that he encountered as an archivist when trying to issue a written critique about the government's declassification process. Can you briefly describe the story and why it reveals, or what it reveals rather, about the way the government archives its own hidden history?
That's right. He was part of an advisory group of historians who was supposed to help the government assess its own efforts at declassification. specifically of documents having to do with our involvement with Nazis and fascists after the war. And he wrote a little piece that was supposed to be published in a larger collection, a piece that was strongly critical of the declassification program and took issue specifically with the attempt to appoint John Yoo. You remember that name?
Oh, yeah.
John Yoo, the notorious attorney who sought to justify the Bush regime's torture program. They tried to put him at the helm of the National Archives. Now, there was a fuss over this, and cooler heads prevailed. But the interesting thing is that Christopher Simpson's piece about this, which he submitted to the National Archive for publication in their report, was itself censored. They left it out of the report. So it's now part of the new introduction to Christopher Simpson's blowback, which is the first, and I think by far the best history of U.S. recruitment of Nazis and fascists after World War II for help in the Cold War.
Certainly tells a different story than what we've been told about World War II and the defeat of Nazi Germany, Mark. You know, I have to say, in the introduction to this series, you write an excellent introduction to the 5 books on ebooks, that once these books are gone out of print, they're gone forever. Is that really true, though? Because I was able to find these books in full on Amazon. I mean, what's the big deal with not having hard copies, Mark, when the advent of the internet's making books obsolete anyways?
Well, don't forget, we are publishing ebooks, so, you know, we're not actually offering hard copies. I actually wish we were, because I'm a kind of diehard fan of actual books. Nevertheless, your point is well taken, which is why we're doing these as ebooks. Many of them are available in used editions online, but the fact is that when you publish a book properly, that's a way of introducing it to the world, you know? If you go to look for a particular volume to buy it used on Amazon, that suggests to me that you already know that it exists.
Right.
You see my point? Whereas what we're doing is we're republishing them. We're making the world aware that they exist, and, crucially, we're offering them with new introductions to bring them up to date. We got a lot more books coming out, you know, in the next few months and in the years to come. We're going to be doing I.F. Stone's Hidden History of the Korean War. We're also going to be doing Stone's Underground to Palestine, along with all of his other writings on Israel and Palestine. We're going to be doing Gerard Colby's DuPont Dynasty, Behind the Nylon Curtain. This is an amazing history of the DuPont dynasty that the DuPont Corporation itself managed to kill twice, both in the 70s and 80s. We're bringing that out with a new introduction.
Mark, I have to tell you that, I mean, I was so fascinated just reading the books that you sent me. I cannot wait to dig more into this really hidden history here that everyone needs to check out. Thank you so much, Mark Crispin Miller. Amazing project. Everyone get involved.
Thanks, Abby. As you pointed out in your introduction, we don't ban books. The First Amendment prohibits it. But there's more than one way to skin a cat. And in fact, hundreds of books on crucial subjects, indispensable books, books full of truth.
Been taught. Join me now to discuss further. I'm joined by New York University Media Studies professor Mark Crispin Miller himself. Thank you so much for coming on, Mark.
Oh, it's good to be back, Abby. Thank you.
So, Mark, outline some institutionalized ways that literature is routinely censored in this country.
Well,
Stranger to the censorship of contentious novels and historical accounts of controversial events. One needs to look no further than right here in the U.S. Now, of course, the First Amendment prohibits the outright banning of books by the federal government, but there are many less insidious ways that dangerous content is being kept off American bookshelves. When you think about the concept of banned books, totalitarian states that practice mass book burnings probably come to mind. But open societies are also no strangers. Earlier this month, New York University professor Mark Crispin Miller released a list of 5 historical books that have been actively suppressed and hidden from Americans. These books focus on issues from abortion to financial inequality and tell stories of an America that don't conform to the mainstream narrative we've all